Our contributor today is Dr. Michito Tsuruoka, and he's actually joining us from Australia. I'll just very briefly introduce him. So Dr. Michito Tsuruoka is an associate professor at Keio University, but he's in Canberra at the moment because he's a visiting fellow at the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre of the Australian National University there. And he's got very broad international experience in the defence area. So he was a senior research fellow at the National Institute for Defence Studies in the Japanese Ministry of Defence from 2009. And while he was there, he was seconded to the Ministry of Defence as Deputy Director of the International Policy Division. He's also spent a year in London as a visiting fellow at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute. And he's also spent time in Belgium as an advisor to NATO. And in fact, he got his PhD also here in London at King's College.
Oh, thank you very much for the kind invitation and kind introduction. My name is Mr. Tsuruoka. I'm now joining this from Canberra, but I very much remember that when I was a PhD student in London, I think it was nearly 20 years ago or so, I often visited the Dio Foundation for seminars and workshops. And so I very much look for this occasion. So perhaps you can share my slides. Oh, yes. Yeah, thank you very much. So today's topic is the war in Ukraine from a Japanese perspective. So I'll be talking about of course, war in Ukraine and the Japanese reaction to that, and also I wanted to share with you some discussions and debates taking place in Asia, not only in Japan but also in other Asian countries. So Asia-Pacific sort of a debates and conversation on this war is also something that I would like to talk about today. So first, the war at glance. So looking at this war, what is quite remarkable is the fact that the Russians made a series of miscalculations. So there are essentially mainly two kinds of miscalculation. The first is that the Moscow underestimated Ukraine's ability to counter Russia's invasion. So the Ukrainian forces and also the people's support for that have been very much stronger than what Russians had expected before the start of the invasion. And also Moscow underestimated the West NATO countries' solidarity and unity. So this also includes G7, that the G7 summit is coming this week. So including Japan. So the like-minded countries have been very much supportive of Ukraine and also the imposing sanctions on Russia. So the level of unity and the level of solidarity among those countries, I think, is very much stronger than what Mr. Putin expected before. So the weapons assistance and weapons provision, the level of that and the scale of that is also unprecedented. And also the economic sanctions against Russia is also very much unprecedented. And Japan is very much part of that. So Russia has made a series of miscalculations, and this is one of the things that I wanted to point out. And also, this is also something that Mr. Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, emphasized when he visited Tokyo earlier this year. And actually, the Keio University hosted his talk, and I had a chance to chair the session, actually, and I was quite impressed by his a very passionate sort of plea and his very passionate the way of talking and on Russia, not only Russia but also China and Russia-China relations, Russia-China cooperation. So his visit, NATO Secretary's visit to Tokyo was very much serious. It was not all the first time for NATO Secretary General to visit Tokyo, but it used to be, including the visit by Mr. Stoltenberg himself 5 years ago, always that NATO, the Japan for NATO, was part of a the diplomatic outreach activity far from NATO's core business of deterrence and defense. So it was more just a dialogue and a dialogue for friendship, so sort of visits before, but this time it's very different. The Mr. Stoltenberg was quite serious in talking to Japanese about the danger of Russia and also the danger of the evolving nature of Russia-China cooperation. So this is just the another thing that I wanted to share with you, and also the Ukraine's resistance. That's also the level of that, and also the ability of Ukrainians is very much higher than many countries expected before the war, and also the help of a Western NATO countries, the weapons and also the quality and quantity of weapons provision. That's also quite the unprecedented. So this is just a sort of the general a fundamental basic issues that we need to have in our minds in thinking about this war. So now turning our attention to Asia. So reactions in Asia. So if you look at the list of countries in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region, so there are 4, 5, 6 countries and regions that are imposing sanctions on Russia. So first and foremost, Japan. In the context of the G7, Japan is and has been very much active in maintaining its alignment with other G7 partners. And also South Korea, it is quite active. And now that the South Korean government is thinking of providing weapons to Ukraine. So it's quite something for South Korea. So Japan, South Korea, and interestingly, Singapore is also on board, and Taiwan. And also the Australia, New Zealand, and Australia. That's where I'm now, and the interest is really high, and the Australian the assistance to Ukraine has been quite substantial, including providing the armored vehicles and other things, including in the field of cyber security. So the Australians have been playing a very big role, not just in imposing sanctions on Russia, but also providing the weapons and other equipments to Ukraine. So New Zealand is also on board. But the reality still is the fact that China is sort of a providing various kinds of support, mainly political, but other areas as well, the support to Russia. So the China's calculations and China's behavior is also very much something that we need to think about in terms of thinking about Asia's reactions to the war in Ukraine. So let me briefly discuss China's calculations and behavior, and looking at China's very basic principles of its foreign policy and politics and relations with other countries. The principle of non-intervention it's something that Beijing has been championing for many years. But the invasion is the ultimate opposite of non-intervention. And also China is a champion of sovereignty. So they're looking at Russia and Ukraine. Of course, the sovereignty of Russia for China is important, but at the same time, it is logically very difficult for the Chinese to say that Ukrainian sovereignty is not important. No, it's just impossible. So how Beijing could reconcile the principles, its own principles, like non-intervention and the sovereignty on one hand, and the sort of a tacit support for Russia, which is very much violating the very principle of non-intervention and sovereignty. So how Beijing could reconcile the two. And it's not a quite easy challenge for China. But so that is why this is very much very inconvenient and inherently very difficult, delicate, tricky aspect. So that is why it's not quite surprising that for some time Beijing wanted to sort of take distance from the war, and the Beijing doesn't want to be drawn too much into this war. So that's first thing, and for China, the supporting Russia is still important because Russia is a huge neighbor. So having a bad relations with Russia is not in China's interest, which is quite clear. But for China, the relationship with the United States is far more important, which means that China doesn't want to jeopardize its relations with the US for the sake of supporting or by supporting Russia. So this sort of a reality and this sort of a strategic priority, I think it's quite clear, and that could explain a lot about China's behavior since February last year. So on one hand, yes, China has been quite reluctant to say bad things about the war, but at the same time, China has been quite hesitant. And as far as we understand, that China has not yet provided weapons or lethal weapons, lethal equipment to Russia. And that is mainly because China doesn't want to be imposed sanctions, secondary sanctions by the United States. So that is very important aspect. And also the fact that the balance of power between Russia and China is now changing very much in favor of China. And that is very much in China's interest. So Russia is no longer a big brother, and China is a sort of a senior partner in this bilateral relationship. So but still, the sort of caveat we need to put here now is that the complete collapse or complete defeat of Russia is also not in China's interest either, because China still needs Russia on board in terms of thinking about its strategic competition with the United States. So China doesn't want to compete with the United States alone. And for that purpose, China still needs Russia. So still needs Russia as a sort of a functioning major country that matters, that can matter in international relations, in its struggle, in China's struggle against the United States. So the balance of power shifting in favor of China up until some point is very much seen as China's interest. But beyond that, like complete collapse of Russia, or complete defeat of Russia, is not in China's interest either. So this is a sort of the major sort of a fundamental baseline, a reason why China has been quite cautious in dealing this war. So they're not providing weapons, but still they're helping Russia and preventing Russia from getting collapsed. So this is a very much important aspect when we think of Asia's reaction to this war. Now turning attention to specifically Japan's reaction to this war. What is very clear about Kishida Fumio's government's response to this war is that this time it's very different. And for the first time, the Japan is imposing really substantial, serious economic sanctions on Russia. And also Japan is very much committed to help Ukraine resist Russia. So the severe sanctions against Russia, and it is often explained as a as a way to maintain strategic alignment with other G7 partners, which of course includes the United States and the UK, of course, and other major European powers, including the European Union. So the Prime Minister Kishida has been very much, they're always emphasizing the importance of maintaining alignment with the G7. It's not just because that this year Japan is holding the G7 presidency, but beginning last year, the Prime Minister Kishida and other officials from the Japanese government have been emphasizing this aspect. So G7 is quite something for Japanese in terms of thinking about Japan's response to this war and support for Ukraine. And finally, that Mr. Kishida visited Keio back in March, and expressed Japan's commitment and reinforced Japan's commitment to Ukraine. And the question that we need to ask, and you might ask, is the reasons why this time is different. Because following the annexation of Crimea back in 2014, at that time, Mr. Abe was Japan's prime minister, and the Abe government imposed only a sort of a nominal, not at all substantial, not serious, the economic sanctions against Russia. And this time, one of the biggest reasons the Japanese response is different this time is the fact that, of course, the scale of Russia's action is very different this time. So the scale of the sacrifice of the Ukrainian people and the scale of the destruction of the Ukrainian territory, that is quite different from what happened back in 2014. And also the Abe-Kishida difference is also something that we might mention, because the Abe, Prime Minister Abe was very much personally committed to improving relations with Russia, and his ultimate goal was the conclusion of a peace treaty between Japan and Russia, which essentially means that Japan's getting some islands back from Russia. And that was sort of Mr. Abe's sort of a dream. And Abe didn't want to give up that by Russia's annexation of Crimea back in 2014. But Kishida, yes, of course, at the time, Kishida was Mr. Abe's foreign minister, but the Kishida personally, he wasn't that committed to Japan's relations with Russia compared to Abe. So this a difference in personal background and personal level of different levels of personal commitment is also something. And also the Mr. Kishida has been emphasizing that the Ukraine today could be or maybe East Asia tomorrow. So what this shows is that Japan's sort of heightened sense of urgency in thinking about this and thinking about the change of status quo by force. So now the rise of China is not at all new. So the rise of China has been there for many, many years, but still you can say that the challenges and strategic challenges posed by the rise of China, the level of which has increased and quite a lot over the past several years. And that was very much demonstrated by very strong, vigorous the text and words that the National Security Strategy of Japan of last December used. So the sense of urgency has increased, and so that also explains very much why. So this time, Japan's response is very different, meaning that it is much tougher than Japan's response back in 2014. So actually the level of interest in Japan in this war has been remarkably high and consistently high, which is, to be quite honest, quite surprising. So as someone working on European security many, many years, this is quite surprising. And still now the various TV programs on a daily basis talk about now the Ukraine's counteroffensive, and also the Mr. Zelensky's visit to various European countries, and so these are things that still we are very much talking about on a daily basis. And for Japan, from a viewpoint of security and defense, the most important and the most fundamental lesson that we have learned and we have drawn from this war is the importance of deterrence. So we can say and we can praise that the Ukrainian people are brave and heroic, but of course, this is not what they wanted. So it would have been far better for Ukraine to be able to deter this war in the first place. So there's the destruction of the country and sacrifice of the Ukrainian people tell us that deterrence is essential. So no one wants to fight this sort of war. So in the Japanese security and defense discourse, the deterrence, I think, is playing a bigger role. Of course, this is not just because of the war in Ukraine, but the war in Ukraine has sort of helped Japanese realize the importance of deterrence. And also another fundamental question is how we could address nuclear-armed adversary intending to change the status quo by force. So Russia, one of the most important difficulty of dealing with this war is the fact that Russia has nuclear weapons. So the people say that you should not corner those who have nuclear weapons too much, because that could ignite use of nuclear weapons. But Russia is not the only country that has nuclear weapons, of course. And China has nuclear weapons. And of course, North Korea also has nuclear weapons, as far as we understand, of course, outside of the NPT, but still. So if we cannot address Russia because Russia has nuclear weapons, then that would send a very worrying message, because if we cannot address Russia because Russia has nuclear weapons, then how you could confidently argue that we could address China because China has also nuclear weapons. So that also tells us the importance of deterrence in the first place, because once this sort of a violent conflict broke out, then we would face this fundamentally difficult and a question of addressing nuclear-armed adversary intending to change the status quo by force. And the strengthening deterrence posture, strengthening deterrence and defense posture, and in the case of Japan, what we often call it a defense capability. So the strengthening defense capability is also one of the sort of consequences, and particularly the people's support, heightened support and more support for this course of action is certainly helped by the war in Ukraine. Of course, not only the war in Ukraine, but also the heightened tensions over the Taiwan Strait, and also the North Korea's series of missile launches, and these things together, they helped change people's perceptions of security. So that's very much important. So last December, the Kishida government they issued new national security strategy, and also the newly named national defense strategy, and also the Japan is also in the process of increasing defense budget. So within 5 years' time, our aim is to reach 2% of GDP, which is quite something for a country which had long spent only around 1% of GDP on defense. So technically and exactly, Japan is not going to double the defense budget, but still the substantial increase never seen before. So this is at least in part helped by the war in Ukraine and people's heightened awareness about the importance of security and defense in Japan. And contingency planning. The Japanese are now more and more talking about the Taiwan contingency, and it was Prime Minister Abe who first started saying that the Taiwan contingency is Japan's contingency, and that was a very important start of new political discourse. But now that the Japanese it's time for Japan to move to a more concrete stage rather than just saying that Taiwan contingency is Japan contingency. And another aspect is that, of course, the military contingency planning is important, and there's no doubt about that. But at the same time, the war in Ukraine has also shown the critical importance of economic sanctions. So the sanctions contingency planning is also needed. So in the case of sanctions against China, of course, we understand that the sanctions against China are going to be more difficult, much more difficult than imposing sanctions on Russia because of the much deeper economic interdependence we have with China compared to Russia, and also this time that the Europeans and Americans, together with Americans, and have been taking the lead. But in case of imposing sanctions on China, of course, Japan will have to take the lead together with Americans. I'm conscious of time, so I'll wrap up quickly. This is something that I also discussed. So this is my sort of the final slide, and in European and American narratives, it is often emphasized that this war is something between democracy and authoritarianism, or democracy versus autocracy. But this is very much what is called a West's discourse. So Ukraine is defending freedom, and not just freedom for Ukrainians, but also freedom for all the world, for the whole world, or at least the freedom in Europe. So on behalf of other Europeans, Ukrainians are defending Europe's freedom. And that's sort of rhetoric and discourse. And I understand that's sometimes quite helpful in galvanizing European public support for assistance to Ukraine. But still, I don't think it's quite a great idea to emphasize that aspect, because first and foremost, because this war is unacceptable, even if Russia were a democracy and Ukraine were not a democracy. So this war is not acceptable, not because Ukraine is democracy. No, even if Ukraine is an authoritarian state, no, this war should never be accepted. And also, they're looking at the global, the reaction to this war. So particularly seeing from Japan, despite the fact that I'm now in Australia, but still, seeing from a Japanese perspective, the reality in this region, the Indo-Pacific region, is that there are so many non-democracies. We need to get those countries on board. Of course, it may be difficult for those countries to impose sanctions on Russia, but still, we would very much like them not to support this invasion. So for those countries to join, there's a group of countries resisting Russia's invasion. You don't really have to be a democracy. So non-democracies should also be invited to be on board. And for that purpose, this democracy versus authoritarianism sort of rhetoric, I don't think it's quite helpful. So this is just my personal observation, but seen from the Asian perspective, this is also something that I wanted to emphasize. So thank you very much, and I very much look forward to questions and discussions, comments, whatever. Thank you very much.